Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the journalist and author, Rachel Shabby. Welcome to both of you. So to the front pages, as ever, let's kick off then, shall we, tonight with the Eye. It leads with Rishi Sunak's call with Benjamin Netanyahu and a warning to the Israeli Prime Minister, keep a calm head in the face of further conflict with Iran. The Metro reports on the High Court rejecting a claim by a Muslim pupil that her rights were infringed because she wasn't allowed to pray while at school. That is also on the front page of The Express, the head teacher welcoming the High Court's decision as a victory for all schools. And the Daily Mail as well, the headline, Victory for the bravest head teacher in Britain. The Guardian leading with tonight's vote in the House of Commons. Tory divisions exposed as Sunak's smoking ban moves a step closer, their headline. The Financial Times quotes the head of the US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, suggesting it will take longer than expected for American inflation to drop to their target of 2%. And the Daily Star reports on Liz Truss describing their infamous lettuce as part of an evil London elite. Don't forget to scan the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme. You can check out those front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head to Henry Hill and Rachel Shabby. Starting with the Eye, in fact, this phone conversation between Rishi Sunak giving Netanyahu a warning and the phraseology he used that significant retaliation will only deepen insecurity in the Middle East. Rachel.
He's right, and many other European and also the US leadership has been trying to convince Netanyahu that this is not the way to go, that they do not want to see a significant retaliation for Iran's strike on Saturday, which in turn was a retaliation for the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Syria on April 1st. I think this assumes that Netanyahu is a rational player, and the reality is that Netanyahu has his own calculations. First of all, he's got a very right-wing, hardline coalition government that's keeping him in power and that is totally gung-ho about just about everything, including Palestinians, including Gaza, including Iran. These are the kind of people who want to annex Gaza and the West Bank and see the Gaza war, which has already killed 30,000 people, mostly civilians, as not brutal enough. So that's who he's in coalition with. Also, he's facing mounting disapproval from his own country, from left to right. People now disapprove of him, but they can't get rid of him. And that he's lost his MO, which is he's supposed to be Mr. Security. Both October 7 and this Iran strike happened on his watch. And the reality is that for Netanyahu, this is a way of staying in power. What's happened over the last few days is that he's rallied the international coalition to his side, whereas before the provocation on April 1st of the bombing of that Iranian consulate, which Iran would have to respond to, before that, all our eyes were on Gaza. Who's talking about Gaza now? 11 schoolchildren died today by an Israeli drone. What did they do? How are they a threat?
I suppose the point that Israel makes is it doesn't start on April the 1st and that consulate building, although one Israeli said actually it was the building next door to the consulate building, actually. It's the fact that actually Iran has supported proxies, whether they be in Yemen or they're Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, or they are actually Hamas itself that committed those atrocities on October the 7th. Certainly we heard from Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari today saying firing 110 ballistic missiles directly at Israel will not get off scot-free. And that's the difficulty, this direct threat from Iran, which we've not seen.
Yeah, although they did telegraph it several days in advance, so you sort of get the impression that Iran wasn't massively keen on many of those missiles getting through, right? They let everyone get ready to knock them all out of the sky, but they get all the credit for sending them. I think Israel has a legitimate interest in trying to contain Iran's proxies, right? Like, many of those are murderous militias. But a direct strike on Iran doesn't even seem to be in Israel's interests, right? Because it is just going to further escalate a conflict. It's going to potentially get things to the point where the international community, meaning America, would have to intervene. And there's no guarantee, certainly once Trump comes in, that would actually happen to support it. And Israel had actually been making progress. I think one of the interesting things that leapt out to me about the aftermath of this missile attack was you had Saudi Arabia just openly saying, yeah, Iran keeps doing this to try and ruin the sort of normalization of relations between the kingdom and Israel. So Israel has opportunities still to try and win allies, take targeted action against Iran's network and improve its own security. But some kind of sort of ego tit for tat, where it's like, well, they launched a load of missiles at us, and so now we need to send something equally spectacular back. That is just the kind of sort of absurd chain of events that, historically speaking, leads to terrible wars.
Yes, and certainly there are many reports of cabinet splits in the Israeli war cabinet, and there are other cabinets that they're operating as well. The Guardian says they've got an exclusive. This is their diplomatic editor, Patrick Wintour. Benjamin Netanyahu is seeking to trap the West into a total war across the Middle East that would have incalculable consequences for the region and the world, quoting Iran's most senior diplomat in the UK. So the strategy of this and the implications of this are far-reaching.
Well, that's what I was talking about before, about Netanyahu having his own calculation here. And it is not the same as Britain's calculation. It's not the same as America's calculation. Netanyahu is very good at staying in power no matter what. Because if he knows the minute he is removed from power, he's facing a trial. He's facing court. He's facing imprisonment, potentially. So his calculation is basically, how do I keep this dragging on for as long as possible? He knows he's got opposition on the streets. He knows people want to boot him out. And he knows that he also needs to keep his right-wing coalition happy in order to stay in power. So that's what I was talking about before, about him having a very different calculation. The trouble for him is that what Iran has shown is that Israel's policy of deterrence, of we will repel any kind of disgruntlement from our borders, from our neighbours, by being super aggressive, by preemptively being the aggressor in the region, so it will show them not to dare to attack. That's a busted flush. Obviously, October 7 busted it. It's the north of the country is completely evacuated because of the strikes from Hezbollah. Meanwhile, you've got Iran with this unprecedented airstrike on Saturday. Israel now has to reconcile with the idea that the only path is a political solution, is a political process that gives Palestinians, finally, their rights and their freedoms, because deterrence is clearly no longer viable.
Well, we're so far from that path, we're not. I just want to show people the Financial Times as well. A ballistic missile lying on the shores of the Dead Sea, pulled out, if you remember the pictures that we certainly saw on social media, after Israel and a coalition of partners intercepted 99% of projectiles and drones launched by Iran towards Israel last week. The question is, would that coalition be there? Should there be another retaliation by Iran if Israel acts? That's the question, I suppose, for many.
Well, I genuinely at the moment can't foresee circumstances where Western countries allowed a massive ballistic missile strike to hit Israel. The question, I think, becomes if it got to the point where you had needed boots on the ground for whatever reason, because ultimately Israel is picking a lot of fights. I disagree slightly. I think October 7th was not Israel was aggressed against. It's been aggressed against many times throughout its history in the region, but it does have to be careful because America is the only country that can really ever back any of this up, right? No matter what European politicians, when they like to talk big about defence, it's always America that ultimately has to do this. America might be just about to re-elect Donald Trump. Donald Trump's shown absolutely no interest in spending American blood and treasure overseas. So it could be the case that in a few months' time, in a couple of years' time, Israel's strategic situation, which has always been that it had the United States in its back pocket, changes quite substantially. And at that point, you really do want to have a way to walk back your position because you do not want to be in a kind of six-day war situation again.
Can I just point out, because it's important, I'm not saying Israel obviously was massively aggressed against on October 7. That was a horrifying attack. I'm saying that there are root causes that consistently Israel hasn't addressed. For the past 20 plus years.
Rachel, we have discussed
the peace
that a lot
process has been
since
off the
October.
table, and that has had consequences.
OK, apologies for interrupting you. You've got two big stories to do domestically, certainly. One is the smoking ban, lead story certainly for The Guardian and other newspapers as well. The start of this process, I'm going to go to you first if you don't mind, because I know you've been talking about it already tonight, and you are somewhat anti it, right?
I mean, yeah. There's all kinds of principled arguments for or against this policy, but just...
The policy is to stop the start, is that that's what they say?
Essentially, the policy is that they bring in a smoking ban that raises, where you ban the sale of cigarettes to people and the age goes up every year. So after a certain cut-off date, I think it's born in 2009.
Yeah, correct,
there we go. You can't buy cigarettes ever. And it's an atrociously designed policy. The New Zealand policy, which it was copying and which everyone keeps saying, oh, they're doing the New Zealand policy. The New Zealand policy did have this ban, but it also was going to ban the independent resale of tobacco, so set up a national monopoly, so to control the trade. And New Zealand is a long way from anywhere, so it's incredibly hard to smuggle stuff in to New Zealand. None of this is true of the United Kingdom. So all this is it's going to bring in this ban, and then it's going to leave it to trading standards, poor, overstretched trading standards, to try and enforce it. And thousands, maybe tens of thousands of small shops, corner shops rely on tobacco revenue, and they can't afford to stop selling it. And so actually what will happen over the next few years if this policy goes ahead is you will have occasional, essentially arbitrary punishment beatings of independent retailers by trading standards when they catch them. And this country will just get flooded with even more illegal tobacco. 1 in 5 cigarette sales is already illegal. I think the interception rate in British ports of smuggled containers is 1 container in 10.
But 1 in 4 of all cancers has a smoking cause. 80,000 deaths a year. 1 hospital admission, roughly a minute in England, has smoking-related causes. So what do you do if you do not do this?
According to nearly every major international study, including the Khan Review, which was the government's own review from 2 years ago, based on where we are at the moment with our current policy mix prior to this, smoking is going to taper off at about 2% prevalence by 2050.
But younger people are picking it up. That's the
problem,
problem,
fewer people than ever are picking it up. There are still some, in the same way that there are still users of every drug that we've banned, right? You've still got coke users, MD users, all of that. But smoking, we're genuinely winning, right? Nearly every study, except the one the government cooked up.
And the cost to the NHS of, what, roughly £20 million a year?
The point is, and I think this is part of the problem with tobacco policy, is that we're not debating, or we shouldn't be debating, the principle. If Rishi Sunak was actually going to stamp out smoking with a very effective policy, this would be a very different discussion. But it's a really bad policy that is getting a hospital pass because people think the goal is good.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about this, or can I move on to the next one? Do you want to move on?
I actually agree with that. I think it's the wrong way to go about the right goal. So.
OK, interesting. Let's go to the Metro. Strict heads, prayer time, win. Where do you stand on this one? You know, her push that this is a secular school and therefore needs to be seen to be a secular school effectively, Rachel.
I mean, I don't understand this at all. I don't understand why she's so militant about it. This head teacher from this school that has a reputation, that she has a reputation for being the strictest. I don't understand why she needs to ban prayer. Why is it so threatening? Why does she need to prohibit the practice that can be quite effectively facilitated in, say, a prayer room that could be open for all kinds of different faiths and all kinds of different prayers? It makes no sense to me on the terms in which it is presented.
But it seemed to be being divisive within the school, is the point.
Divisive how?
Well, I mean, we
Seriously, divisive how?
Well, I heard that it led to death threats, in fact.
That's not...
There were very large groups.
OK, but divisive in the school how? Were school children saying, we are divided, we are rowing over this?
But apparently that was the case. Yeah, apparently it was causing groups and cliques in the school.
Lots of things cause groups and cliques in schools. Yeah, that's not per se a problem.
No, but well, clearly she thought it was.
She thought it was.
Right, OK, fine, but neither of us were at the school. But
but I'm just saying that we can invent... I think this is a moral panic.
I don't think, no.
I think this is a moral panic.
Well, I think she'd know better than either of us, and she is the headmistress.
Why should she know better than either of us? She's a militant secularist with very strong opinions.
Because she's on the ground in the school, and it's the school with some of the best results in the country. Personally, it wouldn't be my approach to how you run a school, but I think that part of the point of having free schools and the academy system is that you allow a diverse range of institutions which they're allowed to enforce their own views. Now, she has a very French approach towards religion. It's not necessarily mine, but I think she has the right to uphold that in her school.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Henry Hill and Rachel Shelby. Welcome back to both of you. Henry, are we in the end game for the Rwanda bill making its way through Parliament then?
In that sense, yes. In that very specific sense, it does look like the government's going to get the law through. And then it gets to move on to the vast array of technical questions about trying to get these flights off the ground, which is what this story is about. Basically, for several months, the government has been trying to find a carrier to take the contract for flying people to Rwanda. And shockingly, most of these airlines, which are customer-facing businesses, have said no. And as a result, they have ended up asking a non-commercial business which does special contracts for the RAF. There's apparently a clause in its contract which allows the RAF to use some of its planes for special missions, and one of those is going to be...
I think ask is exaggerating.
Ask,
You're doing a bit of heavy lifting there,
yes, precisely, yes. Basically,
the government will activate a clause in a contract.
There's a clause in the contract that allows them to use these companies' planes for certain additional duties, and one of them is now going to be, in theory, assuming it ever gets through the courts, flying people to Rwanda. It's actually slightly remarkable that they didn't go for this at the beginning, because they were never going to get a commercial airline to do it. And all that's done is produced months of intermittent headlines about another person saying no. They could have just done this at the start. But, that's where we've ended up.
Yeah, fascinating. Anyway, so the House of Lords, once again, putting the spanners in the works. It'll all get undone in the Commons tomorrow, possibly even a news conference later this week about how it will all operate. I mean, just a very quick thought on this, Rachel.
It's a horrible policy. It's unworkable. The Lords, far from putting a spanner in the works, were trying to prevent breach of human rights law. But OK, phrase it like that if you want to. But also,
I had 20 seconds.
But also, it's no wonder that they're trying to find these ways because as you say, there's no airline that will want to do this because of the huge pressure and the petitions and the campaigning to try and stop this on the basis of basic human rights, which the government is determined to violate.
Let's talk about Liz Truss's The Lettuce, shall we, and move on. Lettuce Liz, plucky Daily Star lettuce, is part of the evil London elite. She's certainly railing against a lot of things. And also in her book, fascinatingly so, the Metro tells us, that she talked about sharing the Foreign Secretary's residence at Chevening in Kent with Dominic Raab. It was like an exalted student Fletcher. I'd arrive and find protein shakes labelled Raab in the fridge. It probably wasn't necessary, she said. But anyway, some amusing details in the book she's obviously selling.
Yeah. It might end up being the best thing to come out of her premiership. Who knows? I think this, though, is just absolutely a prime example of why she was bad at politics. If something like this happens and you're a politician, you do one of two things. You either laugh along with it and take nearly all of the heat out, or you just don't mention it at all. You don't do this, because now it's back on the front pages. This is mad.
Yes, we need Lettuce Cam again, don't we? Rachel, Henry, thank you both very much indeed.